Hey folks, so I know the demo is already midway through the game. Some stuff bugged out, but whatever. So, I guess that's the cold open. Today we're going to be talking about the competitive casual gap, so to speak. Which is a topic that I don't really talk about much. I talk about things adjacent to it because I think there's a lot of misinformation about just how different Sixes is from just vanilla TF2. But a very common discussion as far as the health of competitive TF2 and its support is concerned is the differences between Sixes and casual play, like your 12v12 casual. So, yes, what to start off with? Well, I may as well talk about what I have said in the past, just to clarify things there. Because the only time I've really directly talked about this topic has been in the context of Valve supporting TF2, in which I said the gap does not matter insofar as Valve can still support the game, which I still think is true. Money can still be put towards tournaments and things, and there can be at least some support for the competitive scene, even if there is a casual and competitive gap, simply for the reason that competitive TF2 works. It's, has been played for years and years now, actually going, well past a decade, but approaching decades, plural. So, yeah, without a doubt, I think that the scene has proved itself healthy enough for support, regardless of where it stands compared to the casual scene. Now, that being said, that does not mean that there couldn't be benefit towards there being a smoother transition from casual play to competitive play. And I think that that is true, that there is a bit of a disconnect there, but not the disconnect people necessarily expect. And yeah, the smoother the transition can be, the easier it is for people to get a taste of competitive play. And the more people that get a taste of that, the more people are going to find out that they actually like it, regardless of whether they were expecting that or not. And the scene overall would be healthier, I would say, or at least have more people, which it's always nice to have more people to play with. Right. That being said, yeah, what is the gap, right? What is the actual disconnect here? Because for a lot of people, their perspective is very skewed towards whitelist changes, basically, and like the state of the whitelist, basically, and the rule set itself. Because you see a game of sixes, and yes, it's 6 players rather than 12 per team, but you're also seeing what you see right now, which is a demo, 2 scouts, 2 soldiers, and a medic. And of course, there's plenty of off-classing that happens, but it's usually not full-time. Usually, if someone is off-classing full-time, it's either because they are like a true believer, or they're just doing it for, not the gimmick isn't the right word, but intentionally, right? Where you are foregoing switching off of this class purposefully, for whatever reason, whether you just like the class or you want to like try and see how it works and play around its flaws or things like that. And there's a variety of reasons that people play their full-time off-class season. Sometimes they're just trolling, right, with their friends because they got restricted on a main class, for example. All these are fine, but yeah, it's not something that you see particularly often. Now, I have hammered home this point, and I still see people misunderstanding, or maybe just repeating the talking points that they have been told for the sake of us versus them, I guess. But no, whitelists really, class limits really don't exist to literally limit the amount that you see a class. I know how That sounds completely, what's the word I'm looking for? Not antithetical, but oxymoronic, I guess. Contradictory is what I'm saying. That seems completely contradictory. Well, why would you restrict classes if you don't want to see less of them? And the reason is not so that these classes are not played full time, is what I'm saying. It's just that in the moments that these classes are played, which happens all the time, not literally all the time, but very frequently throughout the duration of a match. In fact, we're going to see an engineer on the other team's last right now, I imagine, as well as maybe a heavy, maybe a sniper. Point being, though, that class limits exist not to restrict people from playing these classes outright, but to make it so that in the moments that people play these classes, it's actually fair. Because something like an engineer is absolutely incredible defensively. Yep, there's that sentry gun now. And letting teams have 2 engineers does not mean that you're going to see more engineers to mid, or you're going to see full-time engineers, because teams can have 1 engineer, and they don't generally do that, right? So nothing about having a second engineer strengthens the class in those circumstances. No, it's just in the times that you want the engineers, such as when you're on last, then teams can only use 1 rather than 2, because 2 engineers on last is really, really, really strong defensively. But yeah, point being, for basically all these class limits, and I'm thinking, your engineer, your heavy, sniper and spy you can play 2 of. Yeah, for those off-class limits, it's really to restrict the amount of those off classes you can run when you're going to be running them. It does not change when you're going to be running them, basically. Because when you play those classes is up to the actual strengths and weaknesses of those classes and what they're capable of, and not just, oh, we don't like this, so we're going to ban it. Which I think is actually the case for Sniper, but fuck Sniper, so who cares? Right. Who cares about heavy to mid? That is not really a thing anymore, by the way. A lot of people bring that up all the time we'll talk about weapon bans next. Because again, I have had 2 videos now talking about the banned weapons in 6s and my opinions on them, which have changed a bit. I think the vast majority of weapon bans nowadays are honestly just like weapons that you can argue are fine to include, you can argue are fine to exclude, but they're not really so strong that you would even necessarily see them all the time. And as a result, it's kind of take it or leave it. It doesn't really change the fabric of the format in any meaningful way, which is definitely evidence towards the claim that it's not, generally intended to curate the experience, or rather just ban things that are, not liked. But the big point I was trying to drive home in those 2 videos was that by no means are whitelist choices and weapon bans made as off-class control. Because I see people think that all the time, in particular with the heavy to mid, where it's oh, heavy is 6s players don't like playing playing against a heavy on mid, which is true. Playing heavy on a mid is really boring, but there's a perception that all these unlocks are banned to prevent heavy from doing so. Now, once upon a time that may have been true, but since then, especially at least in North America, basically all those unlocks have been unbanned, and we don't see heavy to mid. I know in ETF2L, I think maybe Stake Sandwich was unbanned. One of the heavy speed unlocks was ran, and a Prem team would run heavy to mid, and it really wasn't all that effective. That's maybe the best argument besides the Wrangler. You might see full-time engineers with the Wrangler, but obviously the Wrangler is banned for its defensive properties on last and not to prevent people from running this class full-time. So again, the whitelist changes are really not made with concern towards preserving the 6's class lineup. The 6's class lineup is what it is because it's powerful, because it's versatile, and yeah, because it is good at dealing with most situations. And those situations that it doesn't thrive in so much, you see players switch off. I mean, we have a sniper into last right now, for example. Right. I think that, yeah, honestly, the main argument for choices for sixes that curate the class lineup is mostly just game mode. Like 5CP and Koth definitely lend themselves towards a sixes class lineup, just because those are the game modes in which one team is not dedicated defense and dedicated offense. You are contextually going to be playing defensively or offensively, which I enjoy as a general thing. It's nice being able to have that back and forth. But anyway, we're kind of running away from the point here. Point being that, right, what was the point I was making? Yes, those are the two main misconceptions I see with regards to what is the main gap between casual and competitive play. For sure, there's going to be some players that might really like a certain unlock, and might like to run a certain class all the time. And there is going to be a disconnect there, without a doubt. If someone really only plays Engineer, for example, and they are very used to using the Wrangler in their Engineer gameplay, well, then if they try to play the game competitively, there's going to be some disconnect there, because they are going to be overall less effective on that class than they would be switching to like a Scout or a Soldier, for example. And that unlock that maybe they're used to using, they will not have access to. So there is a kernel of truth there, but by and large, from the way I see it as someone who has been a casual player, has gotten into the game competitively, and sees a bunch of, new competitive players and the mistakes that they make, I think that the number one disconnect between casual play and competitive play is not really anything about the format itself. Because again, if you play in a server with 6 people, even without like whitelists and things like that, even with no weapon bans, you will stumble across something similar to sixes, because these classes are just strong and these strategies are just strong. There would certainly be some messy elements in there. You might be seeing some like Vaccinator, double medic, stuff like that, goofy things. But by and large, it will be more similar to competitive play than it would be 12v12 casual play, assuming players are trying to win. No, where the actual disconnect comes in, from my perspective, is in the actual literal gameplay and the experience of playing sixes. Now, what does that mean? Actually communicating with your teammates and listening to what they're saying and coordinating a game plan and playing around Uber charges, right? And thinking about your positioning and all of these things and team play and all that. Those are the actual disconnects that take some getting used to. And when I have talked about being like, what was the exact topic? I have a video where I talk about where, well, man, I'm lacking hard right now. I did wake up like half an hour ago, but whatever. We were talking about like what to expect, I guess, for getting into sixes, insofar as like how much does your experience in the game matter? There we go. We've broken through. And the point I made there is that you kind of start fresh when you start playing the game competitively, to some extent. Obviously, someone who has a ton of experience in TF2 in general and knows how the classes work and like is good at aiming and things like that and know their movement, know their air strafing, obviously they're going to have a head start. But someone with like 10,000 hours casually and someone with like 1,000, a tenth of that, are honestly going to be on relatively even footing, all things considered, when entering the game competitively, because those things like communication and coordination and team play and all that are just really not present in the game casually. And they are requirements, basically, competitively. You are going to lose if you do not communicate with your team, and you are going to lose if your team does not formulate plans and work together and things like that. So yeah, getting used to the actual sixes environment for me is the actual disconnect. And if we're talking about sort of bridging that gap, then offering some way for players to expose themselves to that environment, I think it would actually go way, way further. And this, the topic today as well is quite informed by not only my own thoughts, but also a discussion that I had at the Denver LAN, actually. So many of you, I'm sure, know Tag, that guy Tag, Tagarung, whatever alias you'd like to use. Old school invite player, makes YouTube videos, and was kind of like a go-to entertainer for a lot of people in sort of my generation and before. And yeah, we had a discussion at the LAN, which was quite nice, and I may as well actually link it in the description or something like that for those of you who want to watch it, because it was on the stream. But one of the topics was this kind of gap, and one of his suggestions actually was sort of just rehaul the in-game competitive mode, which no one plays. Not only because it just doesn't work, but because, I don't know, like, no restriction 6s, which is the format it is okay, but, yeah. But his idea was to rehaul that into 9v9 no class limits, which surprised me. And I don't remember if there were whitelist limits or whatnot, but honestly, with 9 players, it's only going to matter to some extent. And I honestly like that idea for the reason being, you are not giving people 6s or something like 6s to play in game. That's, fine. But what you are doing is giving people an environment where maybe there's a higher expectation to talk. Maybe there's a higher expectation to actually coordinate, formulate a plan, or a higher expectation just to try. And again, those are the main barriers from my perspective towards people actually getting into the game competitively. And yeah, that could be interesting. As far as how the gameplay actually is, again, like 9 players, no class limits, or was it class limit 2? I don't remember. Yeah, like things like having only 1 med for me is a really important thing, just because Uber play is such a central part of competitive play in every format, not just 6s. And it's really fun to play around as well. But I don't know if it needs that if you're sort of this bridged version where, again, you're not trying to be a super competitive game mode. You're just trying to be a game mode where people can try and can communicate and things like that, where it's not necessarily so serious. Now, that being said, you can play 6s casually. Absolutely. And people just play like pugs, for example, and things like that. Now, the interpretation of casual in the context of 6s is certainly a little stricter than in casual play. Like, you're not going to be playing friendly Putis, and your teammates might not be very happy with you if you're just, like, not calming at all and just running in and dying over and over again with no thought whatsoever. But as long as there's, like, an honest attempt at actually, like, playing, then you can do, like, silly things. I mean, a lot of the time people don't really care if you switch to an unlock for something, as long as you've, like, shown that you're actually competent to some extent. Things like that. Right. So, bridging this gap. Now, another thing I like about this kind of idea is that I think a misguided interpretation of bridging the gap in the past has been to adjust casual or competitive play in order to make them more similar, when I don't really like that idea. And this is something I've talked about when I have covered, what is it? Like unlocks being changed to make them acceptable in competitive play. And the trickle-down balance idea. And just to reiterate, my thoughts on that are that trickle-down balance can work in the sense that if something is balanced in competitive play, it's pretty likely to be balanced in casual play, or at least, like, casual play doesn't really have an idea of balance in that sense. So, yeah, obviously there are some unlocks that are proportionately stronger in a casual environment compared to a competitive one, for example, like the flog. But again, like, the casual play is just really not that meticulously balanced, and you don't really need to be worrying so much about that. However, the reason that balancing weapons around competitive play can be messy is because those weapons already exist and people already are used to them. And especially if someone like doesn't play the game competitively, or even worse, doesn't play the game competitively and has a chip on their shoulder against the competitive game for whatever reason, then an unlock being changed, and being changed nominally for competitive play, even though a lot of the time that's not even really the case, but you imagine it's to accommodate competitive players, then you're not going to be happy, regardless of how much you actually liked the weapon or not. I don't think that really even matters that much to this discussion for a lot of people. It's just the fact that it can be changed. The weapon was changed in a way that can be interpreted as worse off, and can be interpreted as for competitive players. That's all you need to get really angry. But anyway, point being, for like weapon balancing and stuff like that, and just adjusting casual play in general to more resemble competitive play, you just kind of run the risk of pissing people off who don't want things to be changed. And I can sympathize with that for sure. Likewise, the competitive scene has been very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Resistant, I guess, to changing the format. Or rather, that statement kind of implies a level of, not solidarity, but uniformity and unanimity that isn't really there. Because there have been dissenting voices, or just various opinions on what to what extent like weapons should just be unbanned if they aren't super, super broken, just to like see how it works, or just try to more resemble, just limit the whitelist for the sake of it, things like that. But overall, people have been generally resistant to changing the format too much to more resemble casual play, because again, competitive sixes just works. Obviously, rule sets and the meta of the game changes all the time, despite many popular opinions in the casual scene. Oh, Lord. But, yeah, the core aspects of sixes is pretty much the same. The classes which are good in these formats have mostly been figured out. The game modes that people like to play, I want to say, have mostly been figured out. But I don't know, maybe there's growing to be done there. But yeah, a lot of the basic strategies have sort of been developed and refined over, the decade plus as well. And yeah, it just works basically. So you don't really want to sacrifice that for the sake of making the game more casual for casual players who might not even be interested in competitive play to begin with. So what do you do? And I think that the suggestion of actually like adding a bridge rather than trying to make a bridge with what's already there is a better idea. And maybe that was somewhat the intention with the in-game competitive. It does kind of seem that way, because it is sort of that setting where you can take the game more seriously. The format doesn't really matter so much again, and no restriction sixes is honestly fine enough. Now, really the only argument you could make between that and like tag suggestion is that is 6v6 versus 9v9, in which 9v9 you definitely have less pressure on you as an individual player, which could be nice. And team sizes are between sixes and 12v12 casual, but still. I think the main reason that something like that failed was honestly not necessarily because of the format. Well, the format meant that sixes players weren't just gonna migrate over and start playing that, right? If that was the intention, that was not going to happen just with the format, right? But I think the main reason that something like that failed is because it just literally didn't work, like functionally, as a piece of software and as a area of the game. It just was not very functional. It's still not very functional, and it just never got a healthy population as a result. And yeah, that's kind of the main draw, I think. Right. Any other thoughts? Because this has been kind of scrambled, but I've covered a lot. I feel like I repeat myself so often because, like, it was like almost a year ago now that I talked about weapon bans and was very explicitly like, hey, these weapons are not banned on heavy. Heavy to mid is optional in North America. We don't see it. That lends credence to lends evidence towards heavy to mid maybe not really being a big deal, and not something that people are worried about anymore, maybe not so powerful. But yet still, like, to this day, I see people saying, like, oh, but they ban weapons because they don't like these classes. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. Right. I don't know if there's anything else. Let me summarize my entire thoughts once, and then we'll... Oh, what an awful Uber from me. Let's summarize my thoughts once, and then we'll probably close things off there. So, in summary, the casual competitive gap is real. There is some disconnect, and it can be challenging at times to get into competitive play if your only experience is casual. The reasons for that are not what most casual players think, i.e. the class limits, although the expectation of playing a standard sixes class, I suppose, is a real thing there. And I don't think it's whitelist changes is that confusing for players or anything like that either. And in fact, a lot of casual players would prefer that some of the unlocks that are banned in sixes were banned in casual play, such as like the Vaccinator, maybe even like the Flogger Wrangler. But, we're done here. We're not going to load up another one because we're summarizing. So yeah, there is certainly a disconnect. It's not what people necessarily expect. It is more so in the actual sixes environment, that being a environment of actual coordination and actual formulating of plans with your teammates and trying to figure out what the opponents are doing, anticipate what they're doing, find ways to counter that, etc., etc. All those things are really not touched on in casual play, and that, for me, is the main disconnect. And as far as a bridge is concerned, it makes more sense, from my perspective, to offer something new for players who actually kind of want to try and maybe dip their toes in that experience, but they're not sure about how they feel with regards to off-classing and stuff like that. Maybe they just want to try out something that's a little harder for them because, just regular casual is too mind-numbing at times, or they just get tired of pub stomping or whatever. All those options to sort of dip your toes without fully immersing yourself in the experience could be nice. That being said, again, just like trying out sixes with the sort of beginner-friendly avenues, which I intend to make a video about soon. The actual... just dipping your toes in like a beginner intended environment is really not that bad. But those same hurdles you're still going to have to get over. I think that offering something in between is nice for offering people something different rather than trying to convert either the purely competitive side or the casual side into something in between, which you either sacrifice the competitive integrity of the format, and then the actual competitive players who have been playing this game and kept the competitive scene alive for years and years would not be interested, or you change a bunch of things in the casual scene. Casual players see that as, oh, they're like ruining my unlocks because of competitive players, and then they get I don't want to say chip on the shoulder, which I've already said. Resentment. They get some resentment over that, perhaps. Some people just don't want stuff to change for the casual side of things. But anyway, that is my overall thoughts here on that kind of casual competitive gap. What should be done about it, perhaps, if something needs to be done about it, because again, whether or not sixes actually gets Valve support, in my opinion, really depends. Doesn't depend at all on there being a gap or not, because again, it just works. It's fun. And yeah. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed, and yeah, I'll see you all next time.